The first time Caleb Foster signed the contract, his hands were shaking so badly the pen almost slipped from his fingers. It wasn't because he didn't understand what he was agreeing to. It was because he understood it perfectly. 3 years of marriage to a stranger, just so his little girl could survive. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway in Boston, Massachusetts flickered faintly above him, casting pale shadows on the cold tile floor. In the small chair beside him, his 5-year-old daughter Sophie slept with her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. Tubes and machines surrounded her small body, quietly beeping like a slow countdown he couldn't stop. Doctors had been clear. Sophie's heart condition required an extremely expensive surgery. Insurance barely covered a fraction of it, and Caleb, a warehouse worker who had already sold his car and emptied his savings, was running out of time. That was when the strange offer came. A powerful technology CEO named Victoria Harrington had recently announced something the media mocked endlessly: a private 3-year marriage contract. The reason was vague, something about protecting her inheritance from a complicated legal dispute involving her family's massive company. All Caleb knew was that the contract promised financial security, full medical coverage for dependents, and complete privacy. But there were strict rules: no emotional attachment, no interference in each other's personal lives, and absolutely no breaking the contract before 3 years. For Caleb, it wasn't a marriage, it was a lifeline. Before the story continues, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes who sacrifice everything for their children. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Caleb had expected Victoria Harrington to be intimidating. After all, she was the woman behind one of the fastest-growing tech companies in America. Headlines described her as ruthless, brilliant, and untouchable. But when he first saw her in person inside a sleek Manhattan office tower, she looked tired, not weak, just tired in a way that suggested the weight of an entire empire rested on her shoulders. She was tall, composed, with sharp eyes that seemed to analyze everything. Yet when she noticed Sophie peeking shyly from behind Caleb's leg during their first meeting, something in Victoria's expression softened for a brief moment. Still, the contract was clear: 3 years, public appearances when necessary, separate bedrooms, no emotional involvement. It was meant to look real to the outside world, but inside those walls, it would remain nothing more than an arrangement. Caleb signed. The wedding itself was quiet, almost secretive, held in a private courthouse in New York. No grand ceremony, no vows about love or forever. Just signatures and cameras kept carefully out of sight. Within days, Sophie's surgery was scheduled. Caleb waited in the hospital again, this time holding a different feeling in his chest, hope mixed with fear. Victoria had arranged the best cardiac surgeon in the country, a specialist who normally treated presidents and billionaires for the first time in months. Caleb believed his daughter might actually live. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Caleb sat alone in the waiting room, staring at the floor, his mind running through every possible outcome. He barely noticed when someone quietly sat beside him. Victoria. She wasn't wearing the sharp business suit he had seen before. Instead, she had a simple sweater and tired eyes, as if she had rushed there without thinking. Neither of them spoke. Hours later, when the surgeon finally walked in and announced the operation was successful, Caleb collapsed into tears he hadn't allowed himself to release for months. And to his surprise, Victoria stayed. In the weeks that followed, life inside the Harrington penthouse in New York felt strange. Caleb had expected cold silence. Instead, Sophie slowly filled the enormous apartment with laughter. She ran through the marble hallways like they were playgrounds. She asked Victoria innocent questions about everything: her work, her office, even the giant city skyline outside the windows. At first, Victoria kept her distance. The contract was clear. But children have a way of breaking rules without even realizing they exist. One evening, Caleb came home from taking Sophie to a follow-up appointment and found something unexpected. Victoria was sitting on the living room floor. Not in a chair, not at a desk, on the floor. And Sophie was placing tiny plastic teacups in front of her like a royal ceremony. For a moment, Victoria looked completely out of place, a billionaire CEO awkwardly attending a pretend tea party with a 5-year-old. But when Sophie giggled and offered her a plastic cookie, Victoria actually smiled. It was the first genuine smile Caleb had ever seen from her. Days turned into months. The 3-year contract slowly began to feel less like an arrangement and more like an unusual kind of family. Victoria never admitted it, but she started adjusting her schedule to be home earlier. She began asking about Sophie's school progress. She even learned how to cook simple dinners, something her personal chef found deeply amusing. Caleb noticed something else, too. Behind Victoria's confident public image was someone deeply lonely. Her parents had died years earlier. Her relatives were mostly interested in her company shares. Friends were rare in a world where most people only saw her wealth. Sophie, however, saw none of that. To her, Victoria was simply the tall woman who read bedtime stories with a serious voice and sometimes forgot to do funny character accents. One winter evening, as snow covered the streets of Manhattan, Caleb stood in the kitchen watching something that made his chest tighten. Victoria was helping Sophie decorate a small Christmas tree. Her careful hands placed ornaments slowly, almost like she was afraid to break the moment. Caleb suddenly realized something. The rules of the contract had already been broken, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly through shared dinners, hospital visits, school plays, and bedtime stories. By the second year, the media began noticing changes in Victoria Harrington. She appeared less cold during interviews. Her speeches about business started including discussions about community programs and children's hospitals. No one knew the reason, but Caleb did. One night long after Sophie had fallen asleep, Victoria stood by the window overlooking the city lights. She spoke quietly about something she had never told anyone before. The 3-year contract had originally been a legal strategy to secure control of her company's board during a brutal corporate battle. Marriage created certain legal protections she needed temporarily. But somewhere along the way, the strategy stopped mattering, because the life inside that apartment had become real. Caleb didn't respond with dramatic declarations or romantic speeches. He simply looked toward Sophie's bedroom door and said something simple. She deserved stability, love, a family that wouldn't disappear when contracts expired. For the first time since signing that agreement, Victoria looked uncertain, because the 3-year deadline was approaching, and the contract required separation. Before we reach the end of this emotional story, I want to ask you something special. If this story is touching your heart, please comment the word hope below. It helps us know these stories truly matter to people like you. The final months passed faster than anyone expected. Then the last day arrived. Caleb stood in the same office where he had signed the contract 3 years earlier. Papers were prepared. Lawyers waited quietly. Technically, everything had worked exactly as planned. Sophie's surgery had saved her life. Victoria had secured full control of her company. The contract had been fulfilled. Caleb signed the termination documents slowly. When he stepped outside, Sophie was waiting in the hallway holding Victoria's hand. The little girl looked confused. She didn't understand contracts or legal arrangements. All she understood was that the woman she called Vicky was suddenly supposed to disappear from her life. Caleb knelt beside her and tried to explain in the gentlest way possible. But before he could finish, Victoria interrupted. She walked forward, placed a new document on the table, and pushed it toward Caleb. It wasn't another contract. It was something much simpler, a marriage license. Not temporary, not conditional, real. For the first time since they met, Victoria Harrington broke every rule she had ever written. And sometimes, the bravest decisions are the ones that risk everything for something real. As Caleb looked at Sophie's hopeful smile and Victoria's uncertain but sincere expression, he realized something powerful. The contract had saved his daughter's life, but love had created a family.